Okay, well, just thank you all, and thank you for working with us as we get started. But I just want to say welcome on behalf of the Southwest Agroforestry Action Network. You know, we're a loose-knit group, but we've been formally presenting webinars for a little while now, so it's been exciting to just continue to meet people and to network and to get to know all of you. So please always feel welcome to join our group. I think our basic mission is just helping people integrate trees, crops, and animals to generate some of our Southwest landscapes. And so just welcome. And I think I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Katherine to get started. And I just wanted to mention that she is an agroforestry and sustainable agriculture specialist with, and I'll let you speak on this behalf, for NCAT /ATTRA. And I've known Katherine for a little while. She's really exciting, and I'm just glad that you are here and happy to present. So I'll just turn it over to you. And
wonderful. Thank you
for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me here today. It's wonderful to be here. SWAN, I have been a fan of SWAN for years, and I'm happy to be an honorary member out here in California. We're kind of considered the Southwest, and so I'm happy to be an honorary part of SWAN, and just very honored to be here. So I'll start sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So like Donna said, my name is Katherine Favor, and I work for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, also known as NCAT, because that's a really long name and we like acronyms. And today I'm going to be talking about our ATTRA program, also known as the National Sustainable Agriculture Information Service. So this is a program that is free and available to everyone. We've got a lot of great resources that are relevant to agroforestry. And so I'm very happy to share about these resources. So first, a little bit about me. I am part of NCAT's Western office. So I'm located in San Diego, California. And I got started working in agroforestry about 10 years ago. First heard about it in undergrad when I was studying sustainable agriculture and viticulture. And I was just really inspired by all the ways that agroforestry could be both economically beneficial for farmers and also provide so many ecosystem benefits, as we all know. So I was inspired to join the Peace Corps in Paraguay to learn more about tropical agroforestry. And I worked down there as a volunteer for 2 years in Paraguay, doing all sorts of tropical agroforestry projects. And then I came back to the US, started working on an urban agroforestry farm in San Diego, and that was really, really neat. And then I went on to get my MS in agroforestry at University of Missouri, and that's where I first met Donna at the Agroforestry Academy. And since then, I have been working for NCAT. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about what NCAT is, because you may not have heard of us specifically, but you probably have used some of our resources. So NCAT, these are just the intentions that I have for the presentation today. I want to provide some history on what NCAT is and what our ATTRA program is. I want to highlight some resources that we have on agroforestry that might be useful for SWAN. And I also want to talk about this new term that's been floating around, climate smart agriculture or climate beneficial agriculture. NCAT has been working on some new projects related to that, and it has a lot of overlap with agroforestry in the Southwest. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. But I'll go ahead and start with just NCAT, what we are, who we are. So we were started in 1976 in response to the energy crisis. So basically, after World War II, there was this big push for industrialization. You know, the world had been using all these factories to produce weapons. And after World War II, those weapons factories were converted, as we know, into fertilizer factories, pesticide factories, and all sorts of other high-tech factories. And the National Center for Appropriate Technology was born out of this idea that we don't always need high-tech solutions for everything. Sometimes appropriate technology is better, and that means like low-tech solutions or mid-tech solutions. So we were kind of born out of that idea. And our mission is to help people build resilient communities through local and sustainable solutions that reduce poverty, strengthen self-reliance, and protect natural resources. So we have two branches. We focus on energy projects and then also sustainable agriculture projects. And that's what my work is. We're headquartered in Montana, but we serve all 50 states, and staff are located in 10 states across the country. So what is appropriate technology? It's such a wordy term, but like I mentioned, it basically is an idea or a philosophy that started after the high-tech innovations that were happening after World War II. And so appropriate technology is an alternative to high-tech, and it has 5 principles. So appropriate technologies are technologies that are small scale, simple to use and operate, meaning regular people like us can use them and operate them. They're typically low cost, labor intensive, and what that means is just human centered. So humans are basically the center cog in the machinery of appropriate technology. Appropriate technologies are typically local or decentralized. It's all about us being able to have autonomy over what we do. And they're also environmentally sound. So that's kind of a high level philosophy of what appropriate technology is. And that's the lens for all of our work here at NCAT. All of the work that we do is channeled through this lens of appropriate technology. So here's just a little timeline that can show, when we were started and how our work has evolved. So NCAT was founded in 1976. And in 1986, that's when we started working on sustainable agriculture. And that is when our ATTRA project was born. And that's really the important thing. That's what I'm here to talk about today, is our ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. So it is also known as, let's see, how can I get out of this? So ATTRA is, there we go. ATTRA stands for Appropriate Technology Transfer for Rural Areas. You don't need to remember that. We just call it ATTRA because it's easier to remember. But basically what we are the National Sustainable Agriculture Information Service. So we are a free service for every farmer and rancher in the country. And we're funded through a cooperative agreement with USDA. So basically USDA funds our work. It's different from being funded by like a grant. Our funding, we're very grateful that our funding is ongoing and more long-term, and that allows us to really continue to do the work that we do every day. And so what we do, I'm going to talk about all this in depth, but we provide lots of different services. Our main services are one-on-one technical assistance, training, educational resources, and research queries. So I'm going to go through all of these in detail just so you all know what we do and how it might be able to serve you. So first of all, who do we serve? We serve anyone in the country, anyone and everyone. So full and part-time farmers and ranchers, farmers who've been doing it forever, also beginning farmers who are just getting started. We serve rural farmers, urban farmers, even just backyard gardeners who are wanting to learn more about how to grow food. We work a lot with Extension and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. They help us and we help them. Also, sometimes we work with just agribusinesses or businesses in general. So we really are here to serve everyone. And like I mentioned, our bread and butter is our one-on-one technical assistance. So we actually have a hotline and an email, and anyone can just call us up at any time of day and actually speak with a person. And you can ask us any question under the sun about agriculture or sustainable agriculture. So this is really, I think this is something that's unique. Nowadays it's so rare to actually be able to call a number and talk to a human. So often we call numbers and we talk to answering services, or we're just told, go to the website. But, with ATTRA, you really can call this number and talk with a human. And you truly can ask any question under the sun. We get all sorts of questions all the time. It could be anything from, I want to start a pastured poultry processing operation. What kind of flooring do I need? To, I don't know anything about how to start a farm. Where can I get funding? Where can I get financing? To, I want to transition to organic. To even, I found this weird fungus on my plant. What do you think it might be? So we are here to help. And we have a team of 30 different specialists, all trained in a different area of expertise. And typically one of our specialists will know the answer to something. And if we don't, we'll connect you to a different agency who does. So that is something that we do too. I like to say that ATTRA is like the first stop. You can call us up and then, we can tell you where to go from there. So sometimes we connect people with Farm Service Agency, with USDA. Sometimes we connect people with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But we're a really good resource. We're a great first stop. And again, this is our hotline. It's on our website. Or if you know who you want to talk to, you can reach out to us directly. So within NCAT, like I mentioned, we have 30 specialists. Everyone has a different area of expertise. And I'm the agroforestry specialist. So if you ever do have questions about agroforestry, feel free to reach me directly. This is my cell. You can text me, you can call me, and then that's my email. So because this is SWAN, I did want to introduce you to some of our Western and Southwestern staff. So like I mentioned, I'm in California, but I've studied agroforestry systems all throughout the arid West and Southwest. So I'd be happy to help if you live anywhere in the Southwest. I can typically help. Also, my colleagues Martine and Anne, they're also in California and they're amazing. Anne's our organic specialist and Martine is our pest specialist. And then in Texas, we've got a big team. Justin, Luce, and Robert are amazing. We also have an entire agroforestry team. So these are our 6 agroforestry team members, and everyone is trained in a different niche within agroforestry. So I'm, a kind of a generalist, and I also have experience in urban agroforestry, in Southwest agroforestry. And then we've got Lee, and he is our silvopasture expert. He's in the Northeast, but he has worked extensively with silvopasture kind of throughout the US. And he also knows a lot about equine silvopasture, if you're ever wanting to learn about horses and agroforestry. Andy is in the Northeast, and he does a lot of forest farming, and he grows mushrooms, and he's cultivated a lot of other specialty crops underneath his own forest. So he's got a lot of practical experience. Justin Morris, he is our livestock specialist in terms of forage trees. So he can tell you all about which trees have the highest protein content for ruminants. So he's just absolutely amazing. So he's a great resource if you're ever wanting to know about, what trees are the best nutritionally for your animals. Aisha Tillman, she's our agroforestry specialist in the Southeast. She's in Louisiana. And Mike Lewis is our hog silvopasture specialist and our riparian buffer specialist. So we truly have a specialist for everyone. And if you go to our website, you can find everyone's contact info right on there. So you can truly feel free to reach out to any of us directly or me. We are really here to help. So the other services that we provide, in addition to our technical assistance, we provide trainings. And that's everything from workshops to seminars to webinars like this, to conferences, to field days. So we do a little bit of everything. Every single week we have a different activity, so we like to stay busy. I'll highlight just a few. We have our annual Latino Farmer Conference. So that's held every year in California. And it's a really unique conference because it is the only conference in the US, the only regenerative agriculture conference in the US that is held entirely in Spanish. So that's really, really awesome. That's one of my favorite conferences. We also have our Soil Health Innovations Conference. That's an annual conference. It's held virtually. So that's definitely one I would suggest marking your calendars for. It's coming up in February, I believe, and we do have some great agroforestry speakers lined up. I won't say who, but we've got some great ones lined up. And that is 100% virtual, so it's accessible to all. And we also have our Arm to Farm program. This is one of my favorite programs. It's a week-long intensive for military veterans who are transitioning into agricultural stewardship. So it's aimed at beginning farmers, folks who really don't come from a farming background, but who want to be farmers. And it is such a neat program because it's a full immersive week-long experience. And it's really great for networking and building relationships and kind of getting a deep dive into what farming actually is. And that one, we change locations every year. We host six to eight Arm to Farms every single year, and they always change locations. So chances are there will be an Arm to Farm coming to somewhere near you. And it's just a really great program. And these are just a few. We on our website, we have our calendar, and you will see that we truly have something just about every week. So in addition to our technical assistance and trainings, we provide a lot of educational resources on every topic under the sun regarding sustainable agriculture. Everything is on our website, and we offer different types of resources too. So we have publications, podcasts, and videos. I think it's really important to offer information in different formats because we all have different preferences for how we learn. Like some of us really are visual and enjoy reading, and taking in information visually. But other times, like, a lot of us farmers, we're really busy and we don't have time to actually sit down and read things. So it might make more sense to just listen to a podcast while you're, on your morning tractor ride or out there feeding the chickens. So we try to format our information in lots of different packaging so that everyone can choose what works best for them. This is an example of some of the topics we cover, everything from horticulture crops to livestock to farm startups to business, marketing, energy alternatives. Truly, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of topics. It's kind of overwhelming, but it's also really exciting. Like I mentioned, we've got podcasts, and we do have a YouTube channel. So check those out for sure. And this is our website, attra.ncat.org. If you go there, you'll be directed to everything. I do want to highlight some of our agroforestry resources, though, because that's why we're here. So like I mentioned, we've got agroforestry experts in every region, so you're always welcome to call us up. We also are in the process of building out our library of agroforestry publications. We don't have a ton right now, but my work plan for the year is just to kind of create as many agroforestry resources as I can. And so we've got a lot coming, including some tip sheets. So here in this graphic, you can see, this is just an example of one I recently did for California. It's just an easy tip sheet for what agroforestry can look like in different USDA hardiness zones. So the one for California is already done. The one for the Southwest is about to be published. So definitely check the website for that. But in this tip sheet, we kind of just go over what the different agroforestry practices are, what their estimated carbon benefits are, and then species recommendations for every different USDA plant hardiness zone. So that'll be helpful. That's coming down the line here soon. We also have videos. This one was a deep dive into coffee and avocado alley cropping systems. That's a really popular system out here in California. We've got resources on silvopasture. So lots of different resources, and many more are coming. Let's see, I'm just going to check the chat to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Let's see. Oh, we've got one question. What is ATTRA's relationship with SARE? That's a great question. So we don't have any direct relationship with SARE, but SARE offers some amazing funding opportunities that we regularly apply to. So a lot of our projects that are supplementary to ATTRA are funded by SARE. So we're very grateful to SARE for some awesome projects that they've funded. Okay, I'm going to highlight some more agroforestry resources that we have, particular to the Southwest. So we were very, very grateful. A few years ago, we got a very generous grant from the National Agroforestry Center to create educational materials on urban agroforestry in the Southwest. And a lot of these educational materials are focused on Texas, but we actually just got an expansion. So we're going to be doing some more resources about California and Arizona as well. So super exciting. These are just some of the topics that we've been able to explore through this grant. And all these resources are going to be available in July. So just hold on a little bit longer and they'll be up. But it was an amazing project, and we got to really explore and develop materials about everything from how to design windbreaks on an urban farm, how to engage the community in a public food forest, you know, what things you should be aware of, what kinds of insurance you need if you're planning on starting a public food forest, how to design an urban alley cropping system on a small scale, basic ecological design for food forests in the Southwest. You know, as we know, the Southwest, we deal with all sorts of crazy things that other regions don't deal with, like extreme drought and extreme heat and extreme cold and sometimes extreme flooding, like what I am experiencing as we speak. So, you know, it's really important to kind of have resources for how we in these Southwest regions can deal with that through agroforestry. And one of my favorite resources that I got the chance to develop was a resource on highlighting the city of Austin's story. Basically, the city of Austin, they're in a floodplain. And so while they typically experience a lot of drought, every 25 years, they're guaranteed to experience a really, really severe flood. And so what the city of Austin did is they actually went, they engaged in this, a buyout program. So they identified homes that had experienced repeated flooding over the course of decades. They bought out those homes, demolished them, and they're actually restoring that floodplain with community agroforestry. So that was an incredible story to cover. We're making a lot of different resources so that other cities can follow suit. You know, as climate change continues, we're all just kind of experiencing these climate extremes. And so I think it's really important to know what are our tools for how to deal with all these climate extremes. So this is a project I'm really excited about. Like I said, these resources are not ready yet, but they will be ready in July. So stay posted. So speaking about climate change, you know, it really is so important now more than ever to talk about how we can adapt to climate change and also mitigate it. How can we be part of the solution? And then also, how can we just survive it? Because it's here, it's happening, it's severe. And as we know, agroforestry can be a part of the solution. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions about what I just presented on before I dive into this section of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions about ATTRA or the services that we provide? Feel free to unmute and ask me too.
Katherine, this is Jim. How do you interface with like cooperative extension offices? You know, there was that question about SARE, but then there's the cooperative extension as well. How do you all interface with them?
That's a really good question. So we have no direct relationship with them, but we do very similar things as Extension. Extension also has extension agents who you can talk with, and they also produce a bunch of resources. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll work with local extension agents to identify what questions farmers are having, what resources farmers need. So Extension often lets us know like what resources need to be created. So for example, like we work, you know, we work with extension agents kind of all over the country, but I work with extension agents in San Diego, and years ago they were helpful in identifying some of the problems that grape growers were experiencing in this region. And so they can kind of inform us what farmers are needing, and then we create resources from there. And we also direct folks to them a lot too. So if someone calls us up with a question like, you know, I have this fungus on my plant, what is it? If we don't know what it is, or if we don't have the bandwidth to actually go out to that farm and take a sample, which we usually don't have the bandwidth to go to farms, then we put people in contact with Extension, and they're usually able to then send out someone to the farm. And similarly, Extension often refers people to us. So, you know, if we have a resource that they're in need of, they often just refer folks to our website. So it's kind of an informal partnership, but there's no official tie or anything like that. And I would say the same goes with NRCS. It's the same exact thing. They refer people to us, we refer people to them. And yeah, we kind of work that way. That was a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? If not, I'll keep...
Donna, and were you pretty involved with, I'm looking at my notes now for the urban agroforestry, and perhaps you can give an example of kind of what you gleaned maybe from the community education and engagement in a public food forest.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
I'll have a contingency, but go ahead and start there.
So this was such an interesting topic to explore. I got the chance to go to Festival Beach Food Forest in Austin, Texas, and they are a food forest that is on public parkland in Austin. And so what they did, they worked with the city. They basically, their full story is that a power plant was decommissioned, and they had this piece of land, and the city had to decide what to do with this piece of land. And a bunch of people came together and said, we want a food forest. And so this group of community members and nonprofits went to the city of Austin and said, okay, how can we make this happen? And they entered into kind of a shared maintenance agreement where the city of Austin decided that they would do some basic maintenance of the food forest if it was installed, and that the rest of the management would be done by nonprofits and community members themselves. And so that's a big task, you know, installing, designing, and then maintaining a food forest by the community. It's a lot of work. And so the Festival Beach Food Forest had to develop a plan for how are we going to do this in a sustainable way? How are we going to engage the community and have them utilize this space in a way that's rewarding to them, and also maintain it in a way so that it's not, so that it's usable, so that it remains a community asset. So this nonprofit called Fruitful Commons, they basically, what they did, they started, well, they installed the food forest, and then they started engaging the community, but through all different means. They had so many different strategies for engaging the community, and some of their strategies were having weekly plant walks. So they would just get a volunteer who was knowledgeable about the plants in the food forest to lead weekly food walks, so anyone from the community could show up and get a tour of the food forest and learn how to forage. They would typically forage plants together and then share some food, which I think is super cool. And they said that that was a way that community started to be built, because people would come together. Neighbors who didn't know each other would come together and learn together and then share a meal together. And, you know, when you share food, you just bond. And so more and more people started coming. And then those people who, you know, first just attended as learners eventually were able to become teachers, and they started teaching more and more people. They had community volunteer days. So they, you know, I think it's 2 days a week that the food forest is open to volunteers to just come and weed things and harvest and prune and do all these maintenance activities together. And they also have festivals, and I think their festivals are quarterly, if I'm not mistaken. And they actually get bands, and they really attract a lot of people who normally wouldn't come to a food forest that way. And it's a great way to just educate people about how to grow your own food, and to let people know that like this public food forest is available to everyone to utilize. The really neat thing about this food forest is that it's open 24/7. And so people can come day or night. There are no fences. You really can just go use it. You can sit under the shade of a tree. You can harvest. You can just bird watch, butterfly watch. So I think this was a really, really great example of everything that's possible. You know, if you do want to start a public food forest, they had some awesome ideas for how to engage the community and educate the community. And I'm just mentioning a few. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but I was really inspired by their story. And through this project, we also got the chance to tour Coastal Roots Farm in San Diego. And that's a farm I actually used to work on. And I worked there 5 years ago. And since then, they've really expanded their community engagement tools. So they have a food forest festival that they actually do yearly. And they bring in hundreds and hundreds of people from throughout the community to just learn about what food forests are, how to grow food. So I think there are a lot of different ways to educate the community. And, you know, really what I found from working on this project is that the best way to educate and engage the community is by getting community input. So you can create a strategy for engaging the community, but the best way to do that is just by, first of all, just creating a space for people to come together, and then ideas will kind of come up organically, and then people can have ownership in creating sort of an education strategy that works for them. So that's in a nutshell. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what.
Well, and you kind of answered my question, because just getting the people's buy-in from something that is traditionally maybe a row of tomatoes and a row of cucumbers, and, you know, kind of that organized look to maybe a food forest, and have that buy-in so they understand that it's a kind of an ecosystem. And really that led into perhaps the question on city code and regulations. You know, if a neighbor thinks that it looks, untidy, perhaps, I don't know, but you answered it. So thank you so much. And I don't know if you want to comment on the deregulation or the codes and regulation component of that, but.
Yeah, that's another really important topic. When I was exploring this project, a lot of food forests talked about how difficult it was to start projects, because, sometimes you do have to change zoning or work with your local city to allow certain ordinance or certain, what would you call that? Certain exceptions to rules. Like Garcia Street Farm is one farm. It's an urban farm in San Antonio that I went to, and they had a lot of issues because they wanted to have a hoop house, but the city had a rule where on agricultural zoned land, you couldn't have any permanent structures, and some city employees thought that a hoop house was a permanent structure, and others didn't. And so they actually really had to go fight and determine, okay, a hoop house is not a permanent structure. And so it really is something to think about. And in this video, we're basically what it is saying is that it's really important to work with your city. If you're starting an urban agroforestry project or a public agroforestry project, communicating with the city is really, really important. Oftentimes they do want to support urban agricultural projects, but they might not know what it takes to actually make that happen. So the general lesson from that video, I would say, is just work with your city, figure out what's legal and what's not legal before you start breaking ground, because you can get fined pretty bad if you do things that go against code. So I'd say everything, go forward with caution. If you're in a city or if you're doing anything public, you definitely need to enter into agreement with a city or a county. So that's kind of the nutshell version, but more details will be emerging soon. And like I said, these will all be ready in July. So definitely stay posted. And let me just make sure there aren't any other questions in the chat. How many acres is the food forest I'm talking about? So Festival Beach Food Forest in Austin is, it started out just an acre and a half, and it's now expanding to 3 acres. And in the Coastal Roots Farm Food Forest in San Diego, it's actually 8 acres. And it has actually some neat components. There's a silvopasture component, which is pretty cool. It's a pastured poultry silvopasture component. And then there's a food forest component itself. And all in all, the system is 8 acres in the middle of the city of San Diego, which is so cool. It's a really awesome asset. Let's see, did I miss anything else? Oh, hello to other Peace Corps volunteers. Wonderful to meet you. Let's see. Okay, yeah, yes, I have a comment here that sometimes fines can happen. Yes, you know, there are all sorts of different fines that can happen, and it is really important to just check with your city before you start anything, just to make sure that everything's okay. And usually cities do want to support urban agriculture of all types, so they can be helpful sometimes. So don't be afraid of reaching out to them. Any topics about using fire to increase biodiversity? That's a great question. I haven't worked on that topic at all, but I think that there are some resources on the ATTRA website about that. And if there's not, shoot me an email, and I can connect you with some other folks who might know about that. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about climate beneficial agriculture. This is another project that ATTRA is working on, and it's actually going to be coming out in 2 weeks. So this is something that's, you know, it's a resource that's going to be available soon. But we are creating a climate beneficial agricultural toolkit, basically in response to all these buzzwords that are popping up in response to climate change and the climate crisis that we're all experiencing. So as you may have heard, the USDA released an incredible award opportunity this year. They are investing $3 billion into what they call Climate Smart Agriculture. And that is absolutely incredible, but it does beg the question, what is climate smart agriculture? It's this brand new term. I had never heard of it. A lot of people don't know what it is. And you know, it comes at a time when we have all these other terms that are new as well. We've got agroecology, carbon farming, carbon beneficial, climate smart. And so at NCAT, we just saw a need for deciphering this kind of mystery. What is climate smart? What is climate beneficial? So we're in the process of creating a toolkit. It's going to have lots of different resources. The first is a glossary, which will give definitions like what you see here of what all these terms actually mean, and what that means for you as a farmer, as a practitioner, even just as a backyard gardener. What do these terms mean, and what can we do with them? So there are a few here that I do want to highlight first to get on the same page. So climate smart is a word that was coined by the USDA. It's an agency-led approach to land management, and it's focused on productivity, resilience, and reducing carbon emissions. So that is great. And there's also a term climate beneficial. And so that it's a term that I kind of like a little bit more because it's not tied to an agency. It wasn't invented by an agency, and it can kind of be applied to, it can be applied more loosely. Climate smart, it does have some parameters that were set by the USDA, whereas climate beneficial, that's just anything that any farmer or gardener does to help mitigate climate change. So that's the term that NCAT aligns with the most. But if you do want to really, really deep dive into the nuances between all these terms, we're going to have a glossary up soon. But I'm going to use today the term climate beneficial. And when I say that, I just mean agricultural practices that benefit the climate by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, sequestering and storing carbon, and preventing the loss of carbon from farms. And we're going to talk about what those climate beneficial practices are. It's really just another word for sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, but with a focus on specifically fighting climate change. So we know that climate change is here. Basically, how it works, the atmosphere is like a blanket covering the earth, and greenhouse gases thicken that blanket and trap heat inside. This leads to warming in some areas, cooling in others. It just leads to climate disruption. And I do want to note that climate change, as we know, it's occurring on a macro level from increased greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, but it also occurs on a micro level. Every time a tree is cut down, that does affect the microclimate, and it also affects localized water cycles. So there's a lot that we as farmers can do on a small scale and on a big scale to fight climate change. A big question right now is agriculture part of the problem? You see graphs like this that come out saying that agriculture is responsible for 11% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. And that is true, but I do want to break it down. So a lot of those emissions, they're coming from things like synthetic fertilizer applications, liming, livestock emissions from CAFOs, factory farms, stored manure. That's when animals, when manure basically is allowed to digest anaerobically in factory farms. It comes from field burning. Sometimes field burning is really good. Sometimes fire can be used as a tool to help fight climate change, but then when it's used improperly, it can contribute to climate change. And poor soil management. So all these things can contribute to making climate change worse. But I think that there's been some rhetoric like blaming farmers for climate change. And I do want to say, I think that that's not very accurate. Sometimes a lot of these things are just natural processes. And so no matter what, they are going to emit some greenhouse gases. And that's just part of being biological organisms and growing plants. There are going to be some emissions. Some are good, some are bad, and some we can change. So is agriculture part of the problem? I would say industrial agriculture, yes, is part of the problem. It's a small part of the problem. Other sectors are way more responsible, but yes, agriculture is a small part of the problem, and there's a lot that we can do to be a solution to the problem. So the good news is that scientists agree agriculture is a huge part of the solution to climate change. So the hope is in our healthy soils, in our trees. We know that through photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they turn it into biomass. They store that carbon in solid form, both above ground and below ground. So trees store carbon above ground in the long term in their woody biomass, in their branches and their trunks. And then healthy soils store carbon below ground in the form of humus, organic matter at the final stage of decomposition. And soils are the largest terrestrial sink for carbon on the planet. So, but the ability to store carbon in soils depends on our agricultural management practices. So the good news is that yes, agriculture is part of the solution, and we can practice climate beneficial agriculture to help fight climate change, and then also to help our farms adapt to climate change and be more resilient. So here's just kind of a diagram of the carbon cycle. I'm sure you've all seen this before. Sunlight and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere are taken in by trees and plants through photosynthesis. They then turn that into above ground biomass in the form of leaves, shoots, branches, trunks, and also they turn it into below ground biomass in the form of roots and then root exudates. As the roots slough off and decompose, all of that organic matter is turned into humus in the long term. And that is where carbon is stored deep underground in the long term. Now, some of that carbon some of that organic matter will be turned back into atmospheric carbon as microbes digest it, but some of that carbon will be stored long-term in humus. So that's really what we're looking for. We are going for carbon being stored long-term above ground in tree trunks and then below ground in humus. So those are the main ways that we can store carbon in the long term. So there are lots of different climate beneficial practices that we can employ on our farms. And NRCS has recognized a few. On this thermometer in this graphic, you can see some of the ones that NRCS has recognized. There are lots of others, but these are just some of the ones that I want to highlight today. It's a little bit hard to see. I didn't realize how small this graphic is, but we've provided the carbon sequestration benefits for each of these practices to show, how beneficial they actually are. But in a nutshell, these are all different practices and they all share a few common tenets. These are all agricultural practices that can benefit the climate by sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in above ground biomass or below ground organic matter. They also are practices that reduce on-farm emissions, that prevent the release of carbon from the soil, and that alter environmental conditions to inhibit oxidation. So that's basically when microbes turn organic matter into back into carbon dioxide that goes back into the atmosphere. So there are lots of different things we can do. Some are, some of these practices are precision nutrient management, holistic plant grazing, intercropping, mulching, cover cropping, compost addition, contour buffer strips, field borders, and then of course, every agroforestry practice is an incredible climate beneficial practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these, and I think I have a few more minutes, but stop me if I go over. First of all, I want to talk about how we know that these practices are climate beneficial. So the Natural Resources Conservation Service developed an incredible tool called Comet Planner, and that's an online tool. It's free, and it provides basically greenhouse gas offset estimates for various conservation practices. So this tool has compiled scientific studies from across the country that have focused on, how much carbon is really sequestered by various agricultural practices. So they compiled all that data and they turned it into this tool. And so what you can do is you can enter in your county and enter in the conservation practice that you are employing on your farm, and you can get estimates for how much carbon dioxide that practice is sequestering or offsetting. So it's a really cool tool. It's still in development because, obviously we do need more studies to know exactly definitively how much we can really expect to fight climate change through various practices. But for now, it's a great tool for providing, I would say, like overarching estimates. So that is how we got these different estimates here in this graphic. It's from Comet tool. And I went through and I kind of summarized, I took the averages for carbon sequestration potential for the Southwest, just for the purposes of this presentation. So all these numbers that we're going to go through are carbon sequestration estimates for the Southwest. And we're going to go through some of them, not all of them, but I just want to start with the practice that is considered to be good for the environment, but relatively speaking, not the most beneficial climate beneficial practice, and that is precision nutrient management. So precision nutrient management is the application of nutrients to the ground at the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. And with precision nutrient management, you can expect to use 15% less fertilizer. So that's really beneficial because when you use less synthetic fertilizer, you are contributing less to climate change. And so, if you practice this on your farm, you can expect to offset up to 0.01 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year. And that's a really obscure number. And so what that means in terms that we can understand is that's enough carbon dioxide it's basically equal to the gas that it would take to fuel 32 miles in a car. So if you practice precision nutrient management, these are the carbon benefits that you can expect. Cover cropping, that's another amazing conservation practice. And with cover cropping, you can expect to offset up to 0.643 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year. And that is equal to the gas to fuel 1,597 miles in a car. So that's a lot. That's a lot of carbon that you're taking in from the atmosphere and storing in the ground. So cover cropping is an amazing climate beneficial practice. And then we get down to agroforestry practices, and you can see that they sequester a lot more carbon dioxide. So alley cropping is the practice of planting understory crops between rows of overstory trees. And with alley cropping, you can expect to offset up to 1.37 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year. And that is equal to the gas to fuel 3,400 miles in a car. And that's on every acre. So that's huge. That's extremely beneficial. Then we go down to riparian forest buffers, which are bands of trees, shrubs, forbs, and grasses that are planted alongside waterways. And riparian forest buffers offset up to 6.37 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per acre per year. And that's equal to the gas to fuel 15,000 miles in an SUV. So that's pretty incredible. That's a lot of benefit to the climate. Then you go down to windbreaks, and windbreaks are rows of trees planted on the edges of fields or in strategic locations to slow wind flow, reduce wind erosion, and attract pollinators. And windbreaks can sequester up to 9.2 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year. And that is equal to the gas to fuel 22,000 miles in a car. Incredible. And then we get silvopasture, even better. Silvopasture is integrating trees, pasture, and livestock into a single system. And with silvopasture, you can offset up to 13.7 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year. And that's equal to the gas to fuel 34,000 miles in a car. With forest gardens or food forests, there aren't super accurate estimates for this practice yet because it's not an officially recognized practice yet in NRCS. So we went off the practice standard for mixed agroforests instead. In practice, it's very, very similar, but I did want to note that. But in general, you can expect food forests, mature food forests, to offset up to 18.2 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year, which is equal to the gas to fuel 45,000 miles in an SUV. And then finally, we have forest farming. So forest farming is the most climate beneficial practice because you are basically planting high value understory crops under an existing forest. And because you're preserving an existing forest, you are sequestering the most carbon dioxide. So these systems sequester up to 18.3 tons carbon dioxide equivalent per acre per year, which is equal to the gas to fuel 45,000 miles in a car. So pretty incredible agroforestry. As you can see, agroforestry practices are the most climate beneficial practices. So yes, you can see from these red arrows, out of all the climate beneficial practices that NRCS has identified thus far, agroforestry is by far the best, and that's really exciting. It's also important to note that all these practices have their maximum benefit when they're utilized together. So an agroforestry alley cropping system, for example, that is utilizing cover cropping in the off-season, that is going to be the best option. Really, none of these practices should be used alone. You should really ideally develop a whole farm planning system and incorporate lots of different practices into your farm in accordance with your resources, your goals, and your values. Let's see, any questions here? Let's see. Okay, Jake has a question about studies comparing natural systems becoming more efficient as they grow larger. That is a good question. I think there are studies on agroforestry systems, carbon and climate benefits over time. I know that younger agroforestry systems sequester more carbon dioxide, but older systems store more carbon in the long term. But that's a really good question. Let's see. Joy says Moon Valley Nurseries has many trees available to donate. That is wonderful. So that is a really, really good point, Joy. So we know that agroforestry is really important to implement, but there actually is a scarcity of seedlings, or there's projected to be a scarcity of seedlings, because we know we need to get a ton of trees into the ground ASAP, and a lot of nurseries don't have the capacity to produce that many trees. So it is incredible to know that Moon Valley Nurseries has trees available. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So with all the information I just shared, obviously we know that agroforestry is an incredible climate beneficial practice that can help farms adapt to climate change and also mitigate it. And there are opportunities for you if you want to participate in some of these carbon markets that are opening up. Carbon markets have a lot of problems, and that's a topic for another day. But they also do offer farmers some economic incentives or reimbursements for doing these practices. It's oftentimes you won't get paid a lot for incorporating these practices on your farms, but you might be able to get paid a little bit. And for some people, it's worth it. So it's worth checking out. Also, I had mentioned that the USDA invested $3 billion in Climate Smart Agriculture. And so basically, they funded more than 80 projects nationwide. And a lot of those projects are just getting started now, and they're looking for farms to enroll. And so a lot of these projects, everyone's different, but a lot of these projects involve actually paying farmers to implement agroforestry practices. So if this is something you're interested, I would definitely recommend maybe setting up like a Google search notification with the buzzword Climate Smart, and see if there are any local organizations who are planning on doing projects with agroforestry, because from what we've heard, there will be a lot of programs who will be paying farmers to implement agroforestry this year. So very exciting stuff is just on the horizon. It's a lot of information, but it's just good to be aware of. There might be some tools that work for you. And yeah, as always, ATTRA is here to answer questions and to help connect you to some of these opportunities. So that is it for me. I shared a lot of information. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, but yeah, thank you so much for having me today and for letting me share.
Well, thank you. This has been just a wonderful presentation, and I'd like to see if the audience has questions. I know you've been putting them in the chat, but
that was a lot of information. Yeah, the climate beneficial agriculture, I definitely think because there's just so much to it. And so, you know, if anyone does have any questions that come up after today, just down the line, just know that you can call us up directly and shout about it, because it can be very hard to navigate. I'm learning a lot about it too. So, you know, I just want to reiterate that we're here to answer questions always.
there was a question. I am curious about the San Diego side. Is there something you can visit?
Yes. So Coastal Roots Farm, they have volunteer hours every Sunday and Wednesday, and you can go visit and actually work in the food forest, which is super cool. And they have their Food Forest Festival coming up on February 5th. And it's so much fun. They're going to have live music and arts and crafts and food and really neat activities. A few years ago, they did this really cool activity during the Food Forest Festival. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the Junior Ranger badges that you can get at national parks if you visit. But basically, if you visit a national park, you can enter a junior ranger program. It's this program for kids where you do certain activities and then you get a badge. And so the food forest at Coast Roots Farm in San Diego, they had this really cool thing where kids got to do different activities in the food forest. If they completed certain things in this little booklet, they were able to receive a junior food forest ranger badge, which was super cool. So, you know, there are great activities for kids, great activities for folks of all ages. But I did think that was another really interesting way to engage the community in food forests. I thought that was a super creative way to get people excited about it.
Are
Katherine,
there other questions out there?
I've got a question. I'm just curious, Katherine, if you connected with any people working on food forests in, say, Arizona or Utah, you know, part of our territory.
So I have not yet, but I would love to. So if you have any recommendations for what to check out, I would love to check them out.
I am.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm sorry about my visual here. There we go.
Hi.
I'm Jennifer Brownson, and I am creating a food forest here on my property. It's just east of Snowflake in northeastern Arizona. So it's really harsh and dry and cold and hot and everything you can imagine, windy. So it's quite an experiment in what can be done even under difficult conditions. But yeah, so if anybody's wants to contact me, they're welcome to do that. I suppose I could put my email on the chat because I love connecting with other people who are interested.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will totally reach out because I would love to hear details about yeah, what your challenges have been. What species have you found to be most successful?
Oh gosh. Well, I mostly resourced a bunch of plants from the high Colorado Plateau area, because that's very similar to ours. And a lot of it is experimentation at this point. So I'll have more definitive answers for you in about a year or two. But so far the plants seem to be doing really well. I even have some somewhat exotic plants like oh, there's a cedar. What's it from? It's from the Middle East somewhere that is not from our area at all. I'm totally willing to experiment with really obscure plants because this is a really obscure place. So
The Cedar Lebanon?
yes, that's the one.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's been very interesting.
Yeah, I think experimentation is such a big part of it. Figuring out what works well and what works well, what plants work well together.
Yeah.
Throughout all the 7 layers of a food forest. Yeah, developing those guilds, it takes time. And then the system always evolves too as the plants grow. Have you, did you say, is this food forest recently implemented?
It's in the process. I've actually got a fence going around the area like in the next month or so to protect it because we have massive predator issues because there's no food anywhere. And so I have to put up quite the fence. But it's worth it because it's my passion. So
Yeah. You know, that was a topic that really came up when we were researching food forests in public spaces, like the food forest in Austin. Predators and pests were a huge issue, and because the space is public, you know, they were limited in like how many traps they could set, or you know, even what kind of organic pesticides to spray, because even organic pesticides, you have a you know, sometimes you can't enter the area even if it's an organic pesticide. And so they really had to rely on a lot of preventative measures like gopher baskets, rabbit like cages around little plants. Have you had to deal with that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. All of my plants that are, because I put them in over the last couple of years, they've all got cages around them until I get the big fence around the whole area.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge. but it's really exciting too when you see something taking off that you didn't expect. It's like, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Pretty
But
fun.
yeah, it's true. Food forests can be very challenging in that respect. I mean, predators and pests are always going to be a problem, but especially, if we're wanting to manage organically and in a way that's not dangerous, then we have to be very mindful of what we're doing.
Yeah. And I've structured my project a lot around permaculture because of the focus on water and a bit about wind and diversity. So yeah, that's been a passion for a long time for me as well.
That's awesome. Have you done like any earthworks, or how do you irrigate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like swales everywhere, water catchments, water collections, ditches, and all kinds of things. Yeah, and it's actually been very rewarding because I have no irrigation set up down there. It's coming from the swales and the water catchments at the moment. I probably will run a line down there, but yeah, just what can be done with that has been really, really rewarding.
That's amazing. Yeah. The food forest in San Diego also had swales and berms, and San Diego gets 12 inches of rain a year. Now we're getting way more, but typically it's 12 inches a year, and we were actually able to not irrigate at all in the wintertime just from berms and swales. So they definitely are really, really important for sure. And that's awesome that you've integrated them.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank
Well,
you.
I'll put my contact in the chat if anybody wants it.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about food forests or anything?
There was a comment, good organic soil with lots of nutrients is your best combatant to weather extremes. That's Nathan.
I agree. Yeah, what is that? There's a statistic that I think every 1% increase in organic matter increases the water holding capacity by, I'm not going to say a number because it's going to be wrong. So it just increases it by a lot. And that's incredible. Things like that are so important for building resilience on farms. 5%. Thank you. Thank you, George. And mulch too. Mulch to, prevent evaporation. That's hugely important as well. Any fog net or high surface area water catching programs? I've never worked with fog nets, but if anyone here has, I would love to hear your experience with them.
Just some comments on that is that you certainly would need to have moisture in the air before that'll work. We don't have much moisture in the air except during monsoon seasons, but that's when we don't necessarily need the water as much.
So you do get monsoons?
Yeah, we get monsoons here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot of extremes to contend with. Yeah. One of the food forests that I toured in San Antonio, they were saying they're experiencing more and more extremes. And San Antonio's always had extreme heat in the summer, but in recent years, we've seen in Texas, they're getting these really, really deep freezes that they've never had before. And a lot of trees just are dying, but a lot of trees are just losing their fruit for that year. And what they found is just diversity has really increased resilience. So if they want apples, they plant like 15 varieties of apples because some flower early, some flower late. And so if you have more varieties out there, you have a better chance of missing that exact freeze point when it's going to damage your flowers. So it's just another thing to think about. How can we increase resilience when we've got all these crazy climate extremes happening?
There's quite a bit of chat going on in the chat. And let's see, have you reached out to Brad Lancaster, a great permaculturalist, Tucson Desert Harvesters? And then let's see, Jake said, oh, we use the HPA like fog nets, but also, increase heat with cool underground soils for moisture capture here in the low desert. So some interesting, do you folks want to expound upon that?
That sounds amazing.
George or Jake? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that, Jake. And I have not reached out to Brad Lancaster, but I'll write that name down. Yeah, so that urban agroforestry grant, we're going to have a lot of resources available soon, but we are still developing it. So there is an opportunity to, like I would love to learn more about other food forests in the Southwest. So Jennifer, I'll reach out to you, and I will reach out to Brad Lancaster as well. And if anyone else has other food forests that they'd like to let us know about, we would love to learn about them and maybe feature them in a blog or something on ATTRA website. Oh, George says there's an agroforestry symposium at the University of Missouri next week on Zoom. Yeah, that's an incredible event. Their agroforestry symposium is always so great. Arco Santi, yes, I've heard of Arco Santi. I know Swan did a presentation on Arco Santi. That was really, really awesome. So Jake says, high heat surfaces next to underground cool areas causes moisture buildup. We use glass and mirrors for heat extremes, deep soils for cooling aspects. Wow, I've never heard of using glass and mirrors. That is so neat. That's awesome. Wow, thank you, Jake, for sharing that.
And Jib just put something on there. If you are not familiar with Brad Lancaster, I highly recommend his TED Talk on planting the rain to grow abundance. So
That's
thank
awesome.
you, Jim. That's a good one. And I guess we're coming down to the last. I do have one question just to see if you kind of know. The Climate Smart, it instantly says commodities. Is it kind of available to the smaller operations and folks maybe just getting started on their own properties for local food sourcing and maybe sharing it later in food markets or whatever, but perhaps not quite in the commodity Richter scale yet?
That's a really good question. I do know that for this project, the USDA's definition of commodity applies to any agricultural crop. So it could be specialty crops too. Like normally when we think of commodities, it's like rice, corn, soy, right? And in this case, it's any agricultural crop. So small and beginning farmers are definitely encouraged to look into some of these opportunities. And I will say, there were more than 80 awards, and each organization that received an award, they have their own project and their own requirements. So I can't speak to, what all of those are for everyone, but I know NCAT, we're doing one in Appalachia with very, very small farmers who want to incorporate agroforestry on their farms. So I think there are a lot of organizations who are kind of targeting the smaller farmers. So definitely look into it and see if there is anything for your area. The awards were just finalized, I think, in September, and then contracts haven't even started yet. So I think that's probably why we haven't heard much about recruitment of farmers yet, but I would set up like a Google search notification for the word Climate Smart and see if any of these opportunities pop up in your area.
Well, and just thank you, Catherine. And I think the last question, maybe Bev, you can answer that. Is this recording, will it be available online?
Yes, it will. In fact, if we are ready to close out the recording, it'll start downloading and I'll get it posted soon. So whenever this program closes, we'll go ahead and get started with that.
Well, and Catherine, just thank you so much for coming today. It sounds like you have a lot of things going on at your location at the moment with all the California rain. So just thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thanks,
With that,
Katherine.
we all say thank you.